Hello, and welcome to my presentation for Assessment 2 of Curriculum and Multimodal Learning. What I did for this assignment was not what I had originally planned. As outlined in the task criteria, I had originally planned to conduct a few lessons to one class using 3 distinct technologies. I quickly realized that with the hectic nature of my placement school, the plan was not going to be successful. There were several reasons that impacted the successful implementation of my original plan. Firstly, the timing was not suitable. My placement school is a religious school, and so my plan coincided with several religious holidays. Secondly, I had to be responsive to the needs of the students. When I realized that my Year 8s and VCAL students may also benefit from software and technologies that I was using with the Year 9s, I decided to plan my lessons accordingly and thought it worthwhile to include this in this presentation. Thirdly, as my mentor was going on leave towards the end of the term, she wanted to get through as much as possible with her students, and so this took priority over what I had originally planned, as my original plan was time-consuming. Part of being a strong teacher is being responsive and creative. I decided that I will go with the flow instead of conducting a few very rigid lessons. I decided that I will design my lessons during my teaching block with the incorporation of digital software and technologies wherever I could across all of my mentor's classes. I would compare the effectiveness of technologies between my 2-week block through feedback from my mentor, conversations with students, and my own observations. My first week of teaching, I used little to no software or technologies, and I ensured that homework given was not computer dependent. The only access to digital media that the students had during English class was to the movies they were studying for English. In my second week of teaching, I commenced with my digitally inspired lessons. I planned lessons using Google Slides that were filled with visuals, memes, and videos. I used Kahoot's quiz for revision and comprehension tasks. I used Canva with the VCAL students to create professional-looking posters. I used Storyboard with the students to engage them in their creative writing tasks. I even used Google Translate to enhance communication with my EAL students. When planning the lessons, I focused on 3 main components that I believe are key to effective lesson planning. I wanted to ensure that my lessons considered the following aspects. Peer collaboration is an incredibly powerful classroom strategy in that peers understand their peers because peers relate to their peers. This involves allowing peers to teach, assess, and learn from each other. Gamification involves the reworking of learning activities to resemble a more gaming environment. Gaming involves problem-based learning, and this has been proven to generate deeper learning experiences. Connectivism, whereby the capacity to know more is more critical than what is currently known. While there is a right answer now, it may be wrong tomorrow due to the alterations in the rapid evolvement of information. Therefore, it is crucial for teachers of the millennial generation to focus on teaching how to learn as opposed to what to learn. Sir Ken Robinson argues that today's schools are teaching for jobs that no longer exist. Sagartha Mitra's work in remote India proves the effectiveness that inquiry learning, when teamed up with technology, can have on generating effective learning experiences. We live in a technological age with vast amounts of information at our fingertips. The children in the remote village needed only minimal guidance to gain knowledge in all sorts of areas while simultaneously learning English. George Siemens' theory of connectivism is an emerging 21st century learning theory. According to Siemens, learners as little as 40 years ago would complete the required schooling and enter a career that would often last a lifetime. Information development was slow. The life of knowledge was measurable in decades. Today, these foundational principles have been altered. Knowledge is growing exponentially. In many fields, the life of knowledge is now measured in months and years. Siemens' theory of connectivism encapsulates the theory of constructivism with respect to the connectivity that is characteristic to the technological age. Canva is supposed to make a website and gives work that professional finish. Storyboard is a comic strip creating site. Students choose their own characters, backdrops, speech bubbles, etc. Google Slides is a fast and efficient way of creating a slideshow that is easily accessible from any device with a connection to the internet. I would often add to the slides at recess or lunchtime if need be after speaking with my mentor. Kahoot is a pub quiz site that is fun and simple to use. Google Translate is a helpful translating tool that my EAL students used when I conducted the classes. Students used iPads when I was teaching the lesson and when I was having one-on-one discussions with them. My placement school has streamed English classes for Year 8s and 9s. My mentor's English classes were both at foundational level. This meant that my lesson plans had to be visual, practical, and to the point. The Year 8s were working on the text Coraline. They were to compare and contrast the graphic novel to the film. Students needed to compare cinematic techniques to illustrations in the graphic novel. My lessons were planned using Google Slides, which was befitting as we could analyze images and scenes from the film together on the central screen. I also used Kahoot a few times. One quiz I used was one that I designed as a revision and comprehension activity for the text. Another Kahoot I used I found on the website. It was for the use of figurative language, which helped with their essays. One activity that my mentor planned was for the students to create their very own Gothic horror stories. Storyboard was a good way to spark their imagination. Most of the students enjoyed using it and they did not need much demonstration. Once the students saw their stories visually, they became more interested in their writing. This was noted by my mentor. She said that it was an effective way to spark their imagination as they struggled with this previously. Students also exclaimed how fun they found this activity. The preset characters on Storyboard meant that they could visualize their own characters. The students enjoyed this activity so much that although we did not have time to complete the stories, the students would continuously ask me if we could go back to this activity. Unfortunately, we had to move on with the curriculum. Google Slides really gave my lessons that edge that was missing from my previous lessons. It significantly improved the structure of the lessons, which my mentor noted on. Lessons were more interesting and stimulating as I would add anything relevant as it came to me during the day. I also used memes, which the students enjoyed very much. In later conversations, a couple of students noted that memes allowed the lesson delivery to, quote, speak our language. Using the central screen meant that I was connected to the internet, which also meant that anything that would come up during class discussion, we could look up instantly. For example, if there was a word that was mentioned that was confusing, I would define it on the screen. If a relevant video or image came to mind as I was teaching, I would just look it up. This process was a good way to show the students how I use the internet to learn new things. I found the students later using the iPad to look up words that they didn't know. The Year 9s were also working on comparing texts. They were working on V for Vendetta and comparing the graphic novel to the film. I used the same ICTs that I used with the Year 8s, with the Year 9s. With the theory of gamification in mind, I used Kahoot's quizzes religiously to make revision and comprehension more fun, which the students responded really well to. Even my mentor joined in on the fun and even got a few answers wrong, which made it even more fun for the students. Again, the use of Google Slides really enhanced my delivery. Using the central screen as a class, we were able to explore the texts together. The more successful lesson was the one on symbolism. Students were engaged and enthusiastic with the lesson as I had many visuals for them to interpret and analyze. My feedback from both my mentor and my students was positive. The real success of this lesson shined through their essays as my mentor and I found that the students used many things that we discussed during that particular lesson in their essays. My mentor noted that in the past, it has been difficult for her students to grasp different notions in texts. In one of the slides, you will see that I used emojis for the students to understand the idea of symbolism. Again, this use of pop culture proves effective as students are able to relate to the information being taught. The VCAL English class was not my main class and I only taught a couple of lessons. However, I had been observing them since my last teaching block and have come to know the students quite well. I also studied the film Gattaca in Year 11 and was shocked to learn that it is still being taught. Even their major assessment task was the same as what I had to do back in 2008. I suggested that my mentor introduce the students to Canva to help them in creating their posters. Once the students saw how professional their work may look, they became more enthusiastic and passionate about designing them. My mentor's feedback was positive, and she said that she will definitely use Canva in the future. Throughout my experience as a pre-service teacher thus far, I have met a diverse range of students that have different language backgrounds, ethnicities, and belief systems. I have also met students with different intellectual capabilities, physical disabilities, and refugees that have had issues with adaptability. The use of technologies in the classroom is an effective way to create student-centered classrooms. Although my use of ICT was perhaps not as intricate as other pre-service teachers may have planned, I achieved positive results. In retrospect, I feel that it would have been too intimidating for my students, my mentor, and myself if I was to use more ICT. This is because my mentor barely, if at all, incorporates ICT in her classrooms. Perhaps she was uncomfortable using technologies. However, after my lessons, she was able to gain a bit more experience using different softwares. She even interacted with the technology herself, and she got to see things from her students' perspectives. We both realized the positive effect that ICT in the classroom had on their engagement. Students were generally more interested and engaged, behavior was easier to manage, and students were less distracted. I also learned that teachers must be responsive and relevant to their students' needs. Students must be flexible in their teaching and allow room for change in their planning. Teachers are not the only source of information. We are facilitators of learning rather than dictators of information. Also, it is okay to challenge students and to set high standards. It is important to not hold your students back just because you feel uncomfortable using certain technologies. The biggest challenge was the scarcity of iPads and laptops at the school. I ensured that I booked the devices well in advance to secure them. It is vital that the government and schools work together to prepare students with the tools necessary to utilize the available technologies. As the world becomes more globalized, students may in the future be applying for jobs that exist overseas. Education in the 21st century needs to prepare students to become worthy contenders with their international peers.